Hi everyone, it's Marco Brown. I wanted to talk about a new proposed law here in Utah that deals with child support. This is HB 197. Its primary sponsor is Carrie Ann Lisenby. And it's interesting in the sense that what it says in essence, and we'll get into the particulars, is that if you owe back child support in a sufficient amount, then the Utah Division of Natural Resources or Wildlife Resources can deny you hunting and fishing tags and hunting and fishing licenses. So it's a really interesting way of trying to get people to pay child support. So let's delve into the particulars and then I'll delve into whether or not I think this is a good idea. So the first thing we need to talk about is what is child support? Because child support actually encompasses a lot more than people tend to think. So I'm going to read part of the Utah Code that talks about what child support is, that defines it. And it says, child support means a base child support award is defined in the code, or a financial award for uninsured medical expenses. So at the very minimum means the amount that in your decree that you're supposed to pay, or your order that you're supposed to pay in child support, plus uninsured medical expenses. Okay. Ordered by a tribunal for the support of a child, including periodic payments, all arrearages means back money owed that you haven't paid yet, which accrue under an order for current periodic payments, and some certain judgments awarded for arrearages, medical expenses, and child care costs. So it can also mean judgments for medical expenses that haven't been paid or child care costs that haven't been paid as well. So we have the base, right now we have the base amount, uninsured medical expenses, and then arrearages on medical expenses and child care costs. Then it goes on. Child support includes obligations ordered by a tribunal or a court for the support of a spouse or former spouse with whom the child resides, if the spousal support is collected with the child support. Now what this means is that we used to do this much more in divorce decrees, and we don't do it nearly as much nowadays, but in some divorce decrees, what we do is we put family support in there. We call it family support. So what we do is we don't delineate between what the child support is and what the alimony is. We just kind of put it all together and called it family support. This was never a good idea. We never did it in the law office. I always thought it was a bad way to do it, but there are a lot of divorce decrees with family support orders in them. So if you have a family support order, you don't delineate between the child support and the alimony, which means they're getting all paid at the same time. So that's kind of what this refers to. So again, we have the base child support, we have monthly medical expenses, arrearages on medical expenses and child care costs, and possibly alimony as well, that all get stuck into this definition of child support. So it encompasses a lot more than people normally think of as child support. So that's something to keep in mind. So let's go to the legislation itself, the proposed legislation, and see what it says. So it begins by saying, delinquent on a child support obligation means that an individual owes at least $2,500 of an arrearage obligation of child support based on an administrative order or a judicial order. So the administrative order would come from the Office of Recovery Services, and a judicial order is just an order from the court. So you have to have at least $2,500 to make this happen. If you owed $1,000, they're not going to deny you tags. But you have to owe at least $2,500. Okay. Then it goes on, the legislation goes on. The individual has not obtained a judicial order staying enforcement of the individual's obligation on the amount in arrears. And again, arrears is just monies that you haven't paid yet that you need to. This code section, it doesn't really apply in real life. You never get stays from judges on collection, so this one doesn't really apply. Okay, then it goes on. It says, and, so all of these things have to be true. And the office has placed a lien on the individual's assets for arrears. Now the office the legislation is referring to is the Office of Recovery Services, which is essentially a clearinghouse for the payment of child support. So if the Office of Recovery Services has placed a lien on an individual's assets for the arrears, Okay, you have to have all of these things. Now let's talk about lien and assets for a second. The Office of Recovery Services very often liens income from people. So they garnish income from jobs, or they garnish tax returns. Okay, that happens fairly regularly. My question with this, and this is what I don't know, and they don't really define it here in this proposed legislation, is what an asset is. So an asset may include income, but usually in divorce and family law, when we talk about these things, and in the other laws, income and assets are actually kind of two different things. So the Office of Recovery Services very regularly puts liens on income. Almost never does the Office of Recovery Service put liens on assets, like hard assets. What I mean by that is cars, bank accounts, even houses, boats. These things we normally think of as assets. They almost never put liens on those. So how much this affects people is going to really depend on how the courts interpret the word assets. Because again, if you have a lien on your tax returns, who knows? Maybe that does count under the code. I'm not entirely sure that it does. I think the language could probably be fixed a little bit in order to clarify that. But how much it applies to people is really going to depend on the definition of asset. Okay, so we go on from there, and really so those are the things that have to happen. And then after that, it talks about how the Division of Natural Resources and the people who sell tags will deny you for a tag or a hunting permit or a fishing permit if you are in arrears, again, $2,500 and all these things are met. It kind of goes through that, and it goes through some other things. But really, that is the crux of it. It's the crux of the legislation. Now, is this a good idea? Let me address that. I tend to think this is probably a pretty good idea in the sense that we already do kind of a number on people who are behind on child support, and that's okay because you need to pay for your kids. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But we impose tons and tons of different sanctions on people for this. So we impose, for instance, we impose monetary sanctions on them, so they'll have to pay attorney's fees, they'll have to pay interest, they'll have to pay arrears. We put people in jail for not paying child support. That has happened on a number of occasions in my career. We will put liens and judgments on assets, homes, all of these different things. We take away their driver's licenses. We do a lot of things to people to make them pay their child support. And some of these things are very, very onerous and kind of counterproductive, especially taking away driver's licenses and putting people in jail. A lot of times what happens is they'll lose their jobs, which makes it so much harder to pay child support if you don't have a job. So those things are kind of counterproductive. They don't happen too often, but I've seen it a number of times in my career where those sanctions are imposed. I think what this is trying to get to is let's not have to do that sort of stuff to people. Let's not put them in jail. Let's not take away their ability to drive a car and drive to work and make money. Let's do something that will really kind of tug at people, because people who hunt love to hunt and they will do anything to fish and to hunt. So you take away that ability from people who really, really love it, and they will do almost anything to get it back. My dad was a salmon hatchery manager in Alaska for years. We lived up there. And let me tell you, as somebody who hunted and fished, and my dad working in that kind of natural resources, wildlife division up there, I can tell you, those people will do anything to hunt. Even if it's straight illegal, they will do anything. So I think this is probably a pretty good way of not imposing those sanctions that are going to really hurt people and make them lose their jobs, but impose sanctions that are really going to kind of tug at the heartstrings and hurt people. And I think this is probably a pretty good compromise to be able to do that. So all in all, I think it's probably a pretty good legislation. I think where they're going with it is pretty good. I think they can clean up the language, especially that asset language, make that a little clearer, because that is going to confuse commissioners and judges exactly, whether it's income or asset and what exactly we should do with that. So I think that needs to get cleared up. But I think on the whole, it's probably a pretty good legislation to get people to pay their child support and support their kids. Now, if you need help with your divorce, you need help with child support, let us know. Our number is 801-685-9999, or visit us on the web, www.utdivorceattorney.com. Thanks, everyone.